writing numbers. Oh, what did I write there?
80.
80. Oh,
That's fine.
yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, everyone. We might get started. My name's Gypsy. I'm your only adjudicator for this debate. Whoa, indeed. Yes, I use she/her pronouns. We've talked about recording 8-minute speeches. The negative team is timing for us. Oh, let's keep track just to make sure that they don't sabotage you guys by like, I don't know, timing to like 4 minutes or something. But hopefully you'll all be able to hear that, but also please time yourselves. I don't really have anything else to say, so if you guys want to introduce yourselves starting from first affirmative.
Okay, so my name is Kellie, my pronouns are they, she.
My name is Stanley, I'm the second speaker, my pronouns is he.
My name is Aryan. I am the third speaker, and my pronouns are he, him.
Awesome, thank you. Ned.
I'm first Nate, sorry. My name is Serena, and my pronouns are she, her.
I'm Aleks, second today.
Will, third, he.
Awesome. Great, sounds good. I'm just gonna get the exact wording of the topic, and then
This is psychologically like hurting me.
Yeah, I know. It's really.
I mean, like, we are actually on the right side of the
Yeah.
building.
no, you're
It's
not.
kind of like-
You're not. You're like Ash should be there next.
Oh,
that's-
no, if we're speaking from there.
Oh, if you're speaking
Yeah.
from.
Oh,
Yeah, if I was sitting there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably asked.
Anyway,
Yeah.
I've seen worse. Like at least the table is not like up here or something.
I want to see my friend.
You can come on YouTube kind of want.
You want?
On YouTube.
So with recordings, it just. Oh no, it's your phone. Okay.
Yeah. So I'm just recording on my phone. My name's Gypsy on Facebook. You've also hopefully got all my details a million times because of equity. So you can just send me a message at any point before the end of the competition probably, and I'll make sure that your speech is redacted. If everyone's ready to get started though, I call upon first affirmative to get the debate going.
Oh, yeah, you're gonna hurt for the way, that's right.
This is recording.
Oh, I wrote on the A3 piece of paper.
I don't know.
Shut up,
I'm
guys.
here for it.
I-
I've been to quite a few.
Monash Easters, I swear I debated Spider-Man about 4 times that like season. Like I was well acquainted with Spider-Man after that.
Just wing it.
Yeah.
You're doing it.
Oh, yes.
Winging it? Oh god. Should I speak from here? Because I feel like I just see everyone, and that's
Yeah.
better than me being like.
Speak from that, I would recommend speaking towards me, but
Oh, wait.
speak wherever you're comfortable.
Oh
Like,
wait, yeah, the thing is.
Yeah,
that,
like
right.
there would be. That's what
Well,
we
I
did
didn't
last
see
time.
that. Sorry. It feels really weird only having like 3 pieces of paper. It's really bold. In case you weren't like a nerd from the ages of like 12 to 16, I'm going to recap what Veritaserum is and what it does in the actual like impacts it has, right? So Veritaserum basically compels you to like tell the truth, but more than that, it tells you to like blurt out your beliefs, right? It's basically a potion that compels you to do that. And in our side of the house, everyone will be on Veritaserum because it is in a global water supply. You cannot avoid it, right? I don't think there's any way to circumvent that. So we're just going to, so essentially we are creating a world where everyone has to be honest, where everyone has to blurt out what they're saying, where everyone has to be clear about what their intentions are, about what their beliefs are, all right? Okay, that's my setup done. Now, Moving on to, okay, so I have two substantive pushes in this debate. So firstly, like structural changes to government, to companies, to criminal justice, and then secondly, this impact on like individuals and how they can like make better life choices or just like have a better life in general, right? Okay. And the first point of like structural changes to governments and companies and criminal justice, well, we just think that like governments and companies and like criminal justice, because again, governments and companies are forced to be more honest, right? This means that when they do interviews, they cannot lie about their agendas, they cannot lie about their international relations, they cannot lie about where like their funding is going to, they cannot lie about, for example, companies greenwashing their products, they cannot lie about having like sustainability in their products, they cannot lie about any of these things. We think that in this like climate, we care about things like greenwashing, we care about things like climate change, we care about things like that, and we think that interviews will be the ones to bring these up, to ask them in interviews, to get it down in writing, in recording, that they have said what they have said, and that we can use that to essentially hold these companies and governments accountable, right? Because we think that all of the democracy devices that exist on both sides of the house, that stuff like voting, that stuff like having protests, that stuff like calling your representatives, we think that exists on both sides of the house, it remains unchanged, except that we have a better tool to implement those democracy devices, right? Because we have honesty, and that is like the foundational, that's like basically the foundation on which democracy relies on. Democracy relies on the people who are in charge to be honest about their views, to represent their views accurately, and so that we think that by having Veritaserum, it gives us basically a tool in our arsenal for us to have like the honesty to be guaranteed and for democracy to essentially be protected. Now, there's I also have like a few like sub-points / examples. So firstly, we think that like essentially okay, on this point about like governments and like repressive governments that like are like less socially liberal or like socially conservative, right? We think that people, minorities such as LGBT groups exist in every strata of society. We think that it exists both like in the vulnerable people that can be exploited, that can be like in vulnerable people, and also in people who are part of the government, who are part of like who hold power in the governments, right? We think that when they are honest about who they are, it incentivizes people to, it like basically calls out the hypocrisy of the state, and also to like incentivizes people to like closer examine like their biases and to be like, okay, why do I think this way? Because like my co-worker who's like really respected is out and as gay in this world where we have so much honesty. This means that these governments are like forced to think about like less likely to have an echo chamber and more likely to have these kind of conversation discourses. And we think that even if this debate takes place in like the most like socially conservative country where like being gay will be like, it will get you stoned, we think that by being honest, okay, bit of characterization here, sorry, hold up. Bit of characterization here, we think that like obviously these things exist on both sides of the house, but the benefit that we can claim is that we don't get innocent people like caught up in that crossfire, right? Because a lot of the times when these like online killings or stonings happen in these countries, it is because of like rumors, it is because of like people who see their behaviors and like categorize them as something that's like LGBT or like associated with trans people. And we think that we are going to be able to protect people who are not like actually who are not part of that identity but still get accused due to like their other personalities. We think that like generally just less people get hurt on our side of the house. We also think that okay, moving on to my like other sub point about criminal justice, we think that the criminal justice system will be more effective because there will be like more solid evidence that are provided in the cases of like sexual assault, in the cases of like things that are more ambiguous and more of like a he said, she said situation. We'll be able to have recordings of audio recordings, of video recordings of people being like, yes, I did this, because you cannot lie, you cannot weasel your way out of it. And even if you try to weasel your way and try to redirect your questioning, you can still like further question them and force them to admit what their like truest innermost beliefs are. And so this is why we will have just like better government accountability, we will have better inclusivity, and we will be able to establish change within like really strict like socially conservative countries, and why we will be able to have better criminal justice on the outside of the house. Now moving on to how like our individual lives will be impacted, right? We think that truth hurts because we're like not used to it. I think that like in a world where everyone is honest, it's no longer going to be like stigma to be like it's no longer going to be stigma to be brutally honest and to like say exactly what you think, right? Hold on. We think that people in general are just going to be more confrontational about things, and people in general are going to be more confrontational about things. So that means like having forced like honest conversations with your coworkers about their salaries, or having conversations with your boss about like why they aren't like paying as much. If you're a woman in the workforce, you can ask your boss why you aren't getting paid as much as your male colleagues. If you're a person of color working in like a white dominated industry, in like working in like research or something, you can ask your supervisors or like your higher ups, why aren't you giving me these opportunities? And you will have it on tape that they deny it based off of things that are based on your based on your race or based on your gender, right? You will be able to have those evidence and therefore be able to like, just in general, be able to improve your life because you're able to hold them accountable at the individual level. Additionally, we think that relationships and friendships will improve on the outside of the house because a lot of the times when you go into relationships or when you go into friendships, your intentions are hidden because one person, like sometimes, right? I'm not talking about all the time, intentions are hidden. This means that like one person is only trying to be in a relationship or a friendship with the other person for personal gain. On the outside of the house, right, you have Veritaserum. When the victim, because there is less of a stigma of people like confronting others, the victims are able to confront these people in their lives that they don't trust, and those intentions are able to be revealed, right? We think that this looks like abusers being outed, because like, okay, there are abusers who like explicitly grab for power and therefore they will just admit it when their victim like questions them on why they are like trying to push them away from their friends, trying to isolate them, trying to like relocate them across the country. Or even if abusers are not like explicitly trying to gain power over the victims, even if they are not like explicitly trying to hurt people, they are like, they still have like implicit line of thinking which the victim is be able to prod and like produce out of them, and so the victim can have like a peace of mind and also like just be able to get out of like shitty situations because they're able to know, okay, these are the person's like true intentions, they do not have what's best for me in mind, and therefore I'm going to be able to leave. So under us of the house, we get also better individual life choices as well as better structural choices. This is why you should vote to propose the motion. Thank you.
Do you know how to turn the noise setting on?
No,
Otherwise I can show you. I figured it out before.
I just kind of like wing it sometimes.
Yeah, I feel like arbitrary, but you go up here, and then you go down. There we go.
That's actually so easy.
I know, but we had the exact same issue my last year, and we also forever being like,
I've been using this for 8 months.
Yeah.
How do I not know how to do that?
oh. Thank you so much. First affirmative, first negative when you're ready. Articulating. Sorry. You're good. Take a moment.
I think you alluded that was the we need to and like push the impact. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, you guys
Yeah.
Oh, I'm okay.
And I think the whole thing trying to or at least this one especially at that time, but I think in every it's going to be religious. Yeah. And then
I know what you're about to do really good, but that's actually sign off there.
Yeah, no. Sorry.
I'll be listening to your face, so don't worry.
Are you?
Yeah.
Apologies for the for your complete rundown.
No, not with this one. Okay. This is just kind of where
apologies. If you're ready, I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Fundamentally, just to re-emphasize the setup of this debate is that under the serum we're currently discussing, is that everybody will be always telling the truth at all times, and fundamentally that it is in response to a stimulus. So if an individual asks you a question, you physically do not have the autonomy and the agency to not even not answer, but simply you have to tell the truth. It is a forced capacity out of you. Now, a few points mentioned by our affirmative team is first and foremost, lives fundamentally what their substantive was about the structural changes and the individual changes and supposedly positive changes. The first and foremost was about companies being able to provide a more transparent, or the government being able to provide a more transparent means of, I guess, functioning as institutions. However, fundamentally, first and foremost, I think that companies in and of themselves do not necessarily, unless you are the CEO of a company, you do not have access to all of the information that said company is able to facilitate, and therefore it is really essentially taking its argument at its best ineffective, because on an individual level, to collate all of those individuals would be a very substantive part. However, on top of that, it is substantially more harmful to those individuals, because you might be coerced to provide information that you are not entirely, sorry, I'm going to leave that point for a moment, because I think a more important point is about the justice system. So first, in terms of companies, it unfortunately is ineffective in terms of practicality. However, in the justice system, I can concede that the affirmative team has provided means of deciding that, oh, we saw an individual, instead of going through the justice system, you can simply just ask them, hey, did you do the crime? And I do concede that, yes, in circumstances, absolutely, this can be beneficial. However, fundamentally, number one, you do not need to interrogate the innermost beliefs of an individual in an interrogation system. Fundamentally, our justice system is upon the fact that if an individual concedes a crime and concedes guilty, that's the end of the process. There's no need to psychologically interrogate them. But first, I think this plays into the individual argument that was presented by the affirmative, is about individuals will be able to be outed potentially, and the examples used for assault cases and various different crimes. Well, I think, whilst, yes, I can see this is true, this provides a means, well, forcibly a means for individuals to come forward and say, if they're asked, hey, X did assault me. However, fundamentally, the harms far outweigh the benefits in this scenario. First and foremost, because once again, this is not consensual. The victims are being forced to provide other people, but unwillingly, with personal information about themselves. And number two, if you are in a situation where, for example, as the affirmative team presented, you are being assaulted, fundamentally, you do not have the you may not have the capacity to leave that situation, and it might become intensified by you trying to interrogate them. Fourthly, is in terms about intentions in relationships, and this is something I will discuss in my substantive in just a moment, but fundamentally, it is not, in a lot of circumstances, day to day and on a wider scale, to be honest with people entirely all the time. In fact, this actually will intentionally hurt your relationships. In this situation, perhaps you could argue that yes, you can find out whether someone really wants to be a friend or not. However, you won't have any friends if every time they ask you a question, even something as simple as, oh, do you like my outfit? And you go, no, I hate it. That's not going to be able to sustain your social relationships, and in turn actually make it more harmful to you and your well-being, which I will discuss in just a moment. Also, the stigma around being honest was another piece of argument brought forth about our family, and I think fundamentally that it's not a stigma if you're being forced to do it. A stigma is a social construct. However, in this situation, as I will discuss in just a moment, it is not a consensual act of you being honest. It's not some revelation of social change and culture. It's you being forced by a drug to act in a particular way in society. So the harms far outweigh the benefits, as I'm concerned. So, moving on to my substantive, I think fundamentally it comes down to 4 different things. The first is autonomy, consent, and privacy. So in many situations, it's actually far more dangerous for an individual to be completely honest. And honestly, of course it is dangerous in many situations, but individuals are actually deprived of their own choice to make their decisions. And individuals have their own judgmental capacity to determine for themselves in our everyday life and in the status quo which we're currently in, which can be defined as what we're currently in, to make their own decisions and determine for them what is dangerous. However, in the world of the affirmative, and what they prefer is that individuals are actually coerced into unconsented behavior. They do not consent to this. It is either tell the truth all the time and drink our drugs water or die. That's the options. Now, the second mechanism substantive is about the scale of harm. And as I mentioned, yes, I can concede in particular situations, for example, our criminal justice system, it can be beneficial for an individual to, if instead of going through a particular process, they can just ask them directly, hey, did you commit this crime? However, I think fundamentally, if you weigh these arguments, particularly when you look at the impact on day-to-day interactions and the fact that these individuals can make their judgments for their own best interests. And importantly, individuals cannot insulate from the harm despite the consequences of the world of the affirmative. So if somebody insults you in the world of the affirmative because they're being coerced to under the drug serum, you cannot prevent from feeling harm merely because somebody and everybody is happening to be completely honest. Now, I think fundamentally a sub-point on this is about discretion. So telling the truth can actually, in many circumstances, put you in danger. So a failing to conform with various social norms in the world, the affirmative can actually put your life in danger in very extreme examples. For example, if you're an individual who is gay in a conservative community and you are forced by the world of the affirmative to, if interrogated, confess your sexual identity and you're not ready for that, you could not only be psychologically damaged, and as an individual you're not ready to process that trauma yet, and yet you have to reveal it anyway, but your life could actually be in danger if the individuals around you do not hold the same certain views. Now, I think fundamentally the main two arguments is about social relationships and governments and major social harm. I think in terms of the governmental system, which was actually a point brought up by the affirmative, fundamentally, if all politicians in Parliament were honest, we wouldn't have a government. Fundamentally, the role of the government is, I absolutely agree, transparency with individuals. However, fundamentally, their job is to provide safety and social order for citizens. And not only is it not reasonably practical in some situations, but it's not actually in the best interest of their citizens and their safety to be completely honest with them a lot of the time. Not only this, if individuals, we see this, for example, if a parliamentarian, if they had to be honest all the time, they would be facing constant scrutiny as a pure messenger of the things that are being developed. And number two, individuals would lose distrust, they would have less trust in the government, so therefore they're not able to, they lose trust in the government and they're unable to have a source of social order in times of crisis, because sometimes it's absolutely necessary for the government to conceal certain information in order to protect the safety and well-being of their people who they put first and foremost. So I think fundamentally it is absolutely essential that individuals have the autonomous decision to choose whether or not they want to be honest all the time, because on the side of the affirmative there is no consent, there are many scales of harm, there is the issue of discretion, and it's not good. Sorry?
Nothing.
Is that it?
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I mean, really strongly point out the point that after kids out of regimes, but you can generalize that to like small religious communities, big ones, but you're always gonna have
Can you give me 1 minute?
Okay.
Indeed.
Okay. How do I structure this? Lucato first.
the negative team is trying to push you this idea where their main argument is like, oh no, it will become worse for the CGS because autonomy, consent, blah blah blah. But I'm going to prove to you why all of their arguments are wrong, right? For example, the first speaker gives an example of the victim being forced to give information to the police. I just find this fundamentally wrong because A, when you go to the police, you consent to giving all your information. It's just inherently true. Like if you don't consent to give your information taken, just don't go to the police. But B, it would be so much worse if you got a crime, for example, if you got robbed or got hit or got something that happened to you, and the perpetrator can just run away scot-free, right? I think it is fundamentally better for the victim to get closure, i.g. like the perpetrator getting caught and like being properly punished. But even if they really want to champion this idea of autonomy, which I will try to attack this principally, right? Because first reason, in status quo, people already think that telling the truth is inherently better. Children are taught that you must tell the truth. So even if we are taking this side, we say that hey, it's not that bad because in status quo people already think that the default should be telling the truth. But B, even if for some reason they still push for the idea that it's wrong, we say that it's okay to take away certain rights to protect other people, right? For example, my rights to wave a pencil should not abuse your right to get thrown to throw this pencil to your head. Like it's just fundamentally true. So we take certain rights so that we protect all of society, and that's what I'm going to prove later in my speech, right? But moving on to my second point, Moving on to my second point about how this will impact the LGBT community, you have to realize that in like developing countries and a lot of places, there's demonization of LGBT community, right? We think this happens mainly for two reasons. A, because there is a lack of exposure to the ideas. They just think that like, oh, gayness is a disease. And B, because people hold fallacies as fundamental truths, e.g. like, it's fundamentally wrong to be gay, right? So we think that Veritaserum, or like whatever its name is, will create exposure because you see people from every strata, not like from the government, but like even from the most minute, smallest community of conservatives, people will come out, right? You can think of a government official, friends, family, your cousin, your brother, your sister, anyone, like they will come out and say like, hey, maybe I am gay, hey, maybe I am transgender. It creates potential for discussion and thoughts because it forces them to confront the truth, right? It forces them to confront the truth that hey, maybe gay is not a disease. Hey, maybe LGBT is not like those Western liberal thought that's bad. It forces systematic change, right? Because society now sees all this. Society has exposure. Society or and a lot of people that holds up these fallacies. Actually comes out, people will stop believing in that, and it forces systematic change because society demands change, right? But even if in extreme cases, if they want to push like, hey, this is bad, maybe like people like, I don't know, in Saudi Arabia will be executed or something, we think that the Veritaserum don't matter that much because in what's happening in Saudi Arabia, like people, if you are LGBT in Saudi Arabia, people around you will already know anyway, and the fact that you're still alive means that the government is not actively punishing them. It's just that if you make a big deal, i.g. like if you're like a government official who's really important and you come out as gay, like you will get punished, but for the most average normal people, it doesn't matter that much. But B, if they say that it harms people in hiding, we say that, okay, sure, you lose some friends, but hey, at least you're living the true life, right? You're living your true you. You don't want to live in a life where you're just faking out your sexual orientation. And either way, you don't want to be friends with bigots anyway, right? But the most important thing is that when a society must confront these facts that hey, gay people are not bad, we create a momentum for change, which is what we're pushing, right? We're pushing for momentum of change. But moving on to the individual level, right? The negative team tries to push this idea. The negative team tries to push this idea that it will be so much harmful for individuals, right? Like you won't have any friends because you keep constantly telling the truth. We say that in this world where Veritaserum is in a global water supply, telling the truth is already normalized. The harm is not like in status quo, where like if I say that, hey, I don't like your shirt, the person will be offended. But like in this world, it's already normalized because everyone tells the truth since they first started drinking water, which is like since their birth. So it's already normalized. Right? But B, even if for some other reason, like the negative tries to push that it will severely impact your relationship, we say that, hey, it's not that bad because you don't want to have bad relationship with other people, right? So you don't want to have bad relationship with people you fundamentally disagree with. So you will be more selective in the start. So how do we weigh this? We weigh this like you will still have friends, but like at least you are spared the harm of losing a relationship after you spend so much time together with the person, right? And moving on to my fourth point is that you have to realize that a lot of companies and products, a lot of companies greenwash their products. Like they advertise themselves as like the greenest, the safest, the most like good for the environment. And politicians tend to lie. They just say like, hey, we really care about climate change and whatnot, and people get to vote for them like, hey, I believe that the politicians care for climate change. This is such a major problem, right? But in our world, the companies cannot greenwash their products anymore, and the politicians will just fundamentally not be able to lie, right? They will just go to interview, do you actually really care about climate change? No, they cannot lie. So it forces the bad politicians and forces the bad companies to go out, right? It forces them out of the system, so like the people can the people know that they are fundamentally bad, so people can make more informed and better choices by choosing for other candidates or buying products that are not like pretending to be green. And we believe that this has a positive net effect on the climate change, because a lot of the problem with climate change is that we think that there is enough being done, but it's not. But when we try to push for things that it's not what's being done is not enough, other people can just come in like, no, look at these changes, look at all these green products, look at all the politicians caring about climate change. Right? We say that this is a very major obstacle, and we remove the obstacle with Veritaserum. That's all for my speech. Thank you. I didn't get to bring there.
Oh yeah.
I only have
Thank you so much. Second up.
Five things in this speech. Firstly, all my companies are not the actor that we care about in this debate. The first thing and only thing to say here is that people and consumers have a real preference to not care about when companies do pretty bad things. That is to say that people know that Amazon treats its workers like garbage. People know that Nike and other sportswear companies, and other just big companies in general, still operate sweatshops in the developing world, and yet they still buy from them. It is deeply unclear from this affirmative team why this truth serum is going to, one, make people more aware of things that they already know, and two, all of a sudden people are going to care about those things when empirically they don't. Sure, maybe a very small amount of people are probably going to change the way that they buy things. Unclear as to how that's going to meaningfully change. We don't care about companies on side negative. More importantly then, next is on the criminal justice system, because they have two claims here. The first is that this coerces people to admit when they've done something wrong. A couple of responses here. Number one is that we don't allow the violations of rights of accused people without proving them being guilty first, which the whole premise here is that you are innocent until you are proven guilty. What this does is it presumes that you are guilty before you are innocent, because necessarily it means that you have to be in a position to confess, which means that they have to like arrest you. They have to take you into incarceration for you to actually have that opportunity. Because like, yes, just because you can tell the truth, it doesn't mean you will tell the truth. Like that's not how Veritaserum works. Like you don't just take it and then start blurting out your deepest, darkest secrets. It is in response to a question or a response to something that has happened. Like literally that's just like Harry Potter lore. But this justifies the removal of autonomy and rights before people are proven guilty. Like that is the reason that we don't allow like judicial, like, you know, people within the law to torture people to get information, because we recognize that until they are proven guilty, they still have rights, and we think that that still applies here. So it is it's also unclear then as to how this works for people who have convinced themselves of the truth. And I don't think that's a question that either of us can answer, which is to say that, like, you know, if you like fully with every fiber of your being believe that you are innocent, does that then mean that you are going to come forward with like admitting that you have committed the crime? Unclear. I think the answer is probably no. Like I think it's an internal monologue that you have. Like you know that that is the truth, and like Veritaserum compels you to tell your truth, not the truth that is like objective to other people. You know, I don't know. That seems like Harry Potter lore to me. But the second thing is that they say it's easy to catch perpetrators. Again, this presumes that people are guilty before they're innocent because they need to be in a position to confess that guilt. But secondly, and more importantly, is it presumes that like the victim has knowledge, or the victim of that crime has knowledge of that person. I think humans are like some of the worst, like are not very good at remembering very crystal clear details when they experience traumatic events. Insofar as like when you experience something traumatic, like, you know, maybe someone's assaulted you, you might think you know what that person looks like, but because your brain is processing all of that information so quickly, it is not always clear that like that is exactly what it was that you saw. That's the reason why like witness testimonies are not the be all and end all of like solving crimes. I think this just makes that problem worse. Because people have to be honest about that. And at the end of this, I just don't think it makes the criminal justice system even better, like any better, but assume that it does in some instances, and this is something we tell you at first, is the scale of harms that this has to individuals is far worse than the potential minuscule benefits that this has to the justice system. So, let's talk about safety, because we tell you at first that discretion often means that you are doing so because you are being safe and because it is a risk to your life when you have to reveal particular information. So what they say is that number one, that exposure is good for changing people's perceptions, and this is in response to like, you know, outing yourself as an LGBT plus person in places that are ultra conservative. And the second response that they have is that people probably already know. So like you being alive is a government choice. First of all, this is a morally bankrupt policy that forces LGBT people or forces people in positions of danger to out themselves for the benefit of other people. That is something that we never stand behind on side negative, because it is a risk to your safety. I just do not believe side affirmative when they're like, no, it's actually like not that bad. Because people who opt out of social norms are always at risk of some level of harm, whether physical or like physiological, like mental. Or just like being ostracized from that society. They cannot just get away with being like, no, this harm does not exist, like you are alive because they've made a choice to keep you alive. That is a very real threat that people face all the time. What this policy does is it means then that if someone does find out, if someone does hear that rumor that you are a gay person, then you are likely going to be at risk of harm, and that is something that we never stood behind, because we recognize that people have the autonomy to determine when a situation is safe or unsafe to them, and they can act accordingly. This means that those innocent people are getting in the crossfire, which is what side affirmative wanted to avoid. But the other thing to say about like people being caught in the crossfire, like, you know, the people who are falsely accused of being like queer or falsely accused of opting out of social norms. Again, it's not true, like it just hurts actual people. But more importantly, when you get found out, when you get outed, like there is a chance that maybe your best friend knew, or maybe like your mother knew, or maybe someone proximate to you knew. When that happens in those situations, it is not just you that is at risk of danger, it is the people around you that is at risk of danger. We prefer a world where you do not have to opt out, like out yourself, where you do not have to like confront that truth. Like as corny as this is, like people should just come out when they feel most comfortable. Like, you know, that's something that we think on side negative is important. Let's talk then about public safety. Because we recognize that sometimes safety is more important in like a broad societal level, which is to say that we think governments are very good at like, kind of determining when or like information is released and how that information is disseminated, which is to say that like governments are generally pretty good at being like, you know what, if everyone found out that they are in like immediate danger, then like, you know, it's going to cause chaos. I think what this changes is it means that governments are not able to sanitize that information in the same way that you can't do that with all of your relationships, meaning that it is just far more likely that like order in society is just like non-existent, which just in a general sense just threatens everyone. We think governments, again, are better able to like kind of determine whether or not that information should be like kind of told to anyone or the way that it should be told. The final thing is to say here is probably our most controversial, but like this just means that you have no politicians, right? Because like the constant scrutiny and having to explain that the world sucks all the time means either that just like no one opts into that job because it's like soul sucking and it hurts, or B, you just actually get the most soulless people to do it because they do not have empathy, right? Because they don't feel bad about constantly telling people that the world sucks. I don't know, I'm sure that seems, you know, probably gonna be bad for society, like writ large. The very final thing in this speech is on autonomy, because we tell you at first that people have the agency to make a value judgment on whether the truth is utile or not. So for instance, we think that people probably actually do value the relationships that they have in their proximate life, which is to say that like you probably aren't going to tell your partner that their singing sucks because you value that person and you value that person's autonomy and their feelings. If you are compelled to tell the truth, it means that you are going to be compelled to tell people things that hurt them all the time. We think, again, you have the autonomy to make that judgment yourself. But additionally, they, on side affirmative, claim that like in your personal relationships means that like if you have an abusive partner, for instance, you're better able to confront that person. Like, well, imagine how that's going to go down. Like, the fact that people are in abusive relationships is not because like their abuser is like, no, I'm not abusing you. It is because there are structures in place to stop them from exiting that relationship. That doesn't change this. I think it makes it worse. But again, we think that people have individual autonomy to determine the value and the risk of that to themselves. For all those reasons, proud to name.
Yeah, I've got a bunch to say.
It's just the consensus. I think it's very important.
Easier to see.
Yeah, write it in your own. I can't read a bunch of people. It's just.
Thank you so much. I'd like to end 3A when you're ready.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine. Oh, fun. Timer. Can I borrow your phone? Can I borrow your phone? My phone is like has auto time off. Is yours on? Like auto time off.
But it doesn't have auto time off. You have to pick time.
I know, but like is the screen gonna turn off?
It's not just one anymore.
Okay.
Well, actually, mine.
Okay. We'll find out. We will find out.
You might have to tap it.
Yeah. Okay.
After 5 minutes, it's like 5 minutes.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, panel. Today I see three main clashes that we're looking at. Firstly, some kind of
vague push about values, an abstract value about autonomy that would seem is the main push from neg. Secondly, about the impacts on safety, and this looks at both, risk to individual lives such as LGBT, which we've talked about throughout the debate, and also about governments holding sensitive information, that's under safety, and then it's sort of about general life, about consumer choices, and about like relationships. So firstly, about this point on autonomy, personal autonomy. Now the opposition has come out and told you that there's this thing about autonomy and choices, and that people must always have this abstract thing about consent. Now we on this side of the house agree that consent is important. We think it's important when you're consenting to be informed, to be actively participating in things, and but on this side of the house, we also recognize that the world that we're characterizing is a world where everyone is under the same influence. It's kind of like if everyone had one leg, it's not that's the new norm. It's not really looking at taking away, because it's still a level of equality. And secondly, at our second speaker, we brought to you this point about, yes, we're choosing to limit rights, but we think that we can choose to limit this right because it gives us better impacts. And we think that the impacts are so great that principally we don't think the right to lie outweighs the right to have a safer government and have better relationships. Now, getting into those two main substantives, which I think is the ultimate point of debating, is like which world is better. Now, firstly, let's look at this point about safety, which is we brought out it first and whipped it second, about discretion, and they've tried to come out and tell you that people being forced to out themselves is very dangerous, and we do agree. Under the current world, it is dangerous. The current world tells us that you shouldn't come out. Now, they've however tried to characterize our world as more dangerous because you'll be forced to come out. Now we think that this danger firstly doesn't actually exist, because we think systems of repression are built on lies fundamentally. We told you at second that when these governments, when these regimes, when these conservative, even like echo chambers such as like private churches are making these claims about gay is wrong or black people are worse, I think that somewhere along that line of logic they'll be forced to admit that they are making a fallacious claim. In regards to, with their beliefs about LGBT people. Let's run with that example. We think that at a certain point in that chain of logic, a priest or someone will have to say, this is just coming from nowhere, it's coming out of a book, and it doesn't actually have any real substantive, because we fundamentally, and I hope the opposition agrees, that being gay isn't wrong, and we think that that's something that you can logically prove, and we think a system where truth is constantly revealed, that logical fallacies in oppressive regimes will be exposed. Furthermore, what we pointed out was it's not just exposure of like everyone, it's something that's coming out at every strata, so it actually combating, like the main reason why gay people are oppressed in these regimes is because, as we said, gay people are demonized and kind of like straw-manned as this thing that, like Westerners invented to ruin us, or that is meant to make us really effeminate, or this and that. And then under our side of the house, we tell you that we will fundamentally see like the Prime Minister coming out as gay. We'll see masculine men coming out as trans. We'll see the Pope being trans. We'll see these powerful figureheads coming out, which will force those governments and force those regimes to acknowledge that being gay isn't fundamentally linked to something bad, and we think that will point out the actual fallacies that oppression is built on. So yeah, that main substantive about safety is to do with systems of repression are built on lies, and that will be exposed. Now, they also made this point about governments are good actors. What? Since when are government good actors? The US government hasn't done a single decent thing in probably all of its existence. You know, it lies for the benefit of profits. There were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. You know, if the government actually had to come on television and be like, no, we actually just invaded Iraq for the oil, lol, then people would refuse to fight. It will show that war is not a moral, superiority that the government is selling you. It is actually something that they're profiteering for lobbyists, because that is what war comes from. We don't buy this idea that the government is a good, benevolent actor. We think that a much better system would actually force governments to admit that their motivations are actually very, very flawed. So that's why we think it's a ridiculous claim to make that the US government is amazing, Let's move on to general life. Now, they came out and said that, we came out and said that, consumers will make better active choices when looking at like greenwashing and things like that. Firstly, people when they can't fake ignorance, I think there'll be a higher social standard that they're held to. When you talk to someone about like, why did you buy that from China? They'll be like, oh, I didn't know. They can't say that anymore. People will actually be judged on their morals way more, and we think that people having to admit that they're morally buying and doing things that they know to be immoral will actually hold them accountable. So it's actually under our side of the house, that truth mechanism is what brings in that accountability. Yes, currently people don't care, but the thing is that they need to pretend to care. And on our side of the house, they can't do that anymore. Secondly, there was this thing about personal relationships and how personal relationships will be worse if, I have to ask my friends, do I look fat in this dress? And they're like, yes, you look fat, always. Then I think, and they're like, that would be bad for personal relationships. Two reasons why that's not bad. Firstly, I opened myself up to that when I asked the question, because we're living in a world where everyone is telling the truth. Secondly, we're living in a world where the norm is the truth, so that's why these harsh truths aren't actually going to be judged as badly, because everyone's constantly having to tell them. Thirdly, these people, I actually do love my friends. I actually don't think that they're ugly. I like them, and I will have to tell them that. I'll be like, yes, you do look fat in that dress, but guess what? You're an amazing, brilliant person, and I'm telling the truth. And I genuinely do think all of my friends are like beautiful. I don't know what kind of people you're being friends with, where you're constantly having to tell them that they're ugly, because, if you're in a partnership, you genuinely do like that person, hopefully, and that's the kind of relationship we want to see prosper. So under our side of the house, we think that people will be able to recognize, yes, they might think that I'm flawed in this way or that way, but ultimately they do love me and think I'm a contributing member of society. So that's why we think personal relationships will once again be better under our side of the house, which is I'm so proud to propose.
No, the second I stop afterwards, I will hold all my things before
Thank you so much for that. After when you're ready to complete the debate.
Okay, so affirmative basically tell you that they mitigate the harms that we provide by proving that there are all these benefits that they get, except they just have not proven that these impacts eventualize, and they have not shown that these impacts are likely in a world where Veritaserum is in the water. Responding to the point on autonomy, they stated that because everyone's under the same influence and everyone is telling the truth, then you're not going to have issues because it's socially accepted that we just tell each other, how we feel, and so, leading into personal relationships, people are just going to know, oh yeah, people are going to be honest. But I mean, this fails to respond to the fact that it feels good to have nice things said about you in a personal relationship, and it's nice when we engage with each other and we tell things positive about our friends. forcing individuals to sort of blurt the truth, often, you know, harming their other person, like saying that they're fat or making comments about their appearance, is probably likely to make people like not feel great about themselves in these relationships. People probably are not likely to ask questions because of it, and people are probably just going to retreat socially. And we think we've proven to you adequately why social relationships become more dislocated and more difficult because people are, you know, ultimately like forced into saying the truth. And when that truth is something that's, you know, like directly like harming the other person about their appearance or about them as a person, then knowing that's coming from a friend really makes it like isolating and dislocating to get along with people and to be able to like have a cohesive society. So in doing this, you're actually massively impacting personal relationships. We think that this isn't good. On the point of consumer choice, at Second Speaker, we prove why people ultimately don't really care about the public stance that companies and corporations take. Like, yeah, companies say that they're doing something about climate change. I think the average reasonable voter probably knows a lot of these corporations are like not great for the environment. They know like Santoso is telling them they're doing great things for the environment while they're like, you know, as a fossil fuel industry. People are probably like smart enough to be like, oh yeah, like they're just saying that. That's what companies and corporations do. That's the spin that these type of things do. Like, forcing them to say the truth in this way isn't likely to change the behavior of corporations. It isn't going to likely to suddenly have consumers like changing the way in which they go about this. Then we hear this sort of argument about governments and you know, saying basically that governments aren't good actors, and so we want them to tell the truth in this case. In response to that, we tell you that ultimately governments and corporations are probably going to be like difficult parties to be able to like force to say the truth in these scenarios. Like, we think it's likely that governments and corporations like maybe try to become less transparent because they know that they're going to be forced into giving the truth. We tell you that some truths that governments might have to say are actually harmful because they can create a sense of social chaos. If you think about like a harmful environment like a pandemic or something in which society is moving very quickly and there are a lot of harms apparent that the government knows about, I mean, sharing all these truths with the population is probably going to massively impact on social cohesion and cause a really a society that is questioning the like ability to manage with these situations and massively doubting the sort of system in which they live. We think some of these truths are probably like not beneficial to people to know, but we think that accessing these truths are difficult anyway. We think like getting to a point where you can talk to the directors of large corporations or actually get inside these is probably just going to reduce. They're not going to do appearances or interviews in that sense anyway. We think it's not likely that there's any benefit here. We don't think that consumers like change at all. We don't think corporations become more ethical. We just think like it's likely there's just no positive impact here. We cannot see why it's proved. On the other side, when we hear at Second Affirmative and early in the debate about LGBTQI people, which we think is a major clash and major like stakeholder in this debate, ultimately we prove to you how LGBTQI people in societies where they're forced to come out, they're forced to tell the truth about their sexuality in certain contexts, like around the world, in places like Saudi Arabia, it's incredibly harmful for them to be forced out of that position to come out when being questioned. Like, if there are rumors that someone might be gay, this sort of forces people to confront them to try and get that answer out of them. We think this forces people to share things that they principally shouldn't have to share if they don't want to. Like, outside of the house, people can come out if they want to. Their side is forcing people to come out in these contexts where they might be literally like have their safety at stake. They said that people wouldn't get punished for forcibly coming out in Saudi Arabia, but it's not clear why they wouldn't in a society that largely condemns this. They do not prove that these societies' cultural norms and views of people, such as LGBTQI people, actually change. Just because a society is truthful on the deliverance of a question does not change views and biases developed like within the community. People still hold beliefs. People still believe things. They might have to tell the truth, but it doesn't mean that they believe it. And so these religious institutions are not suddenly going to start supporting LGBTQI people. Instead, these people are going to be forced to come out to share things that they otherwise wouldn't have, and it's going to put them at danger by people who hold massive interest against them. And principally, what this does is create a massive issue of safety, where ultimately you're in danger, and this is a massive harm to the ostracization of people who don't feel ready to come out. it massively impacts upon the social order of groups, etc. And another big clash in debate is basically this impact that affirmative tries to claim of the criminal justice system. But principally, we prove to you why there's actually a bunch of issues with that. To get the confession of truth, you've got to get the person in a courtroom situation and already in that justice system itself. To get to that, it involves things like arrest, putting them in remand, it involves a level of incarceration, dealing with police, dealing with the criminal justice system. To get to that point, you need to put them there. We think that this reverts to this system where people are presumed to be guilty, and the fact that we've just got to get them into the courtroom to be able to find out if they confess their guilt. And we think that this means that the way in which police might go after people might be done with less evidence than that's necessary and needed, and this might actually genuinely impact people who haven't committed crimes, but puts them into this position because it will lower the bar that society views as trying to get this. Because if we can just get this person in the courtroom, we can force them to confess. So what you're doing is you're enabling a massive massive criminalization of people who are just suspected of it, because if we can just get them in there. So this will naturally lower the bar at which we detain people, and which we arrest people, and just clog up this criminal justice system, because we just want to try and get them on a trial. So we don't think that you actually overcome issues such as trying to find out who's done a crime. People can still run away. There's no way, just because people are being forced to compel the truth. And we also point to the fact that in compelling the truth as they have it, there are genuine issues with the way in which individuals might be able to do that, where recollection is impacted, and their actual mental capacity to reason with the truth is impacted. So you're not always actually getting out what you were to have. And a final point that's raised quite a lot of our debate is that the stigma about what you say is just decreased. Once again, this is simply not proven, because just because people are forced to tell the truth doesn't mean that these things become more socially accepted. Ultimately, the harms that come by this, ostracization of LGBTQI people, we prove that these environments are worse from them, social dislocation, and a just poorer society better off. We don't get any improvement in government transparency. We get massive harms, and so proud to negate.
Thank you so much, everyone, for the debate. I thought this was a really interesting and very fun debate. I know you guys made lots of really interesting points. Normal structure, I guess, feedback, result, reasoning. In terms of feedback, I have two kind of bits of critical feedback that I think could have been improved upon. The first is that in motions like this where, and you get a few of these, where something's changing in the world that impacts so many facets of life, right? It is kind of, as we had so many stakeholders discussed in this debate. I think it's really important that you do more impacting and weighing between those different areas, because in this debate we literally had I don't know, and this will become, I think, clear in the OA, 5 different kind of areas where people were kind of arguing that change occurred. And I think each team kind of rightfully wins some of those and probably does see improvements in some. But there is relatively little analysis into this debate about which ones are more important in impacting people's lives, which ones affect more people. Those sort of kind of weighing metrics I think could have been used a little bit more, or just even further impacting on why the impact is severe here, or why there's kind of secondary impacts that we should care about, and that sort of thing. I think the second, and I think the kind of second part of that kind of weighing point is also being clear in which instances the biggest changes are, because in some instances, this is a way we never would have gotten truth. In some instances, it just speeds up the amount of time we get truth, that sort of thing. So just again, being really clear in what instances this is the most impactful and why those are the ones you're winning on. Because again, there were lots of different issues and comparing them was a little bit tricky. The second bit of feedback is I think that while there was a lot of good response in this debate, I think at times speakers could have done better to engage with the best case of the other team a little bit better, or the newest version of their points a little bit more. I think at times we were kind of responding to titles, or even just I don't know, kind of giving one, I guess, common sense response, but then potentially having an even if or a little bit more explanation of that response would have been good. We got a bit of mitigation that was, effective to mitigate, but I think more work could have been done there to kind of explain why you potentially flip it. Again, I think that's just kind of in being comparative and making sure that you're dealing with all facets of the debate as well as you can, rather than kind of spreading yourself thin and doing kind of everything at kind of a moderate level of goodness, if that makes sense. I will become more clear when I talk about issues where those things applied, and if you guys come up with individual feedback, I can point out the specific areas in each of your speeches where I thought those could have been improved. In terms of the debate, I thought this was a really, really, really close debate, and I think both teams, as will become clear, had good arguments at one point. So I thought, as I said, very close, but I did end up awarding it to the negative team, so congratulations. To explain this, I'm firstly going to talk about the impact that this has on kind of individuals and then on social structures. On individuals, the first thing that I'm going to talk about is this idea of autonomy that comes out of side negative. I think that at times this is interesting, but I'm just kind of flagging it at the beginning here because I don't think that there were that many kind of unique principled impacts here. And I think kind of affirmative does as well to kind of tell me we should probably care about practicals more so. That being said, I do think that there is some useful characterization in this point of autonomy about why people are likely to choose to be honest when it is beneficial to them, which means that while I don't think affirmative makes many points kind of along the lines of being honest is, good. Occasionally when they do say things about like, oh, coming out is probably good because it's better to have it on the table, I believe people probably would do that under side negative because they're relatively rational and they convince me they have their best interests at heart. So I don't think it's massively decisive, but I do think it kind of means that I'm convinced by negative. You guys are sitting on the wrong side, so forgive me if I refer to you as the wrong team at some point. I hope that doesn't get confusing. I'll do my best. But I believe negative that people generally will make relatively rational decisions about that, and that when we get to talking about safety and interpersonal relationships, that means people, when they choose not to, often will make good decisions not to do that when there would be a situation that would otherwise harm them. Which takes me on to safety and then interpersonal relationships. On safety, here, this is mostly talking about queer people, by the way. Here, negative says that often you put yourself at risk by kind of coming out or by exposing your identity. This could be legally, but it could also be socially, even if you're not going to be stoned, you could, have kind of social ramifications of that. And I think that this harm is, pretty certain. It is pretty true that there are people who, when they come out, will be harmed. Affirmative has some good responses, though. The first is that you're likely to improve, or they are both saying you're going to improve societal conditions kind of long-term through this. The first reason is through increased exposure. I think that you do get more exposure, but the link from this to creating a more inclusive society needed a little bit more work of explaining why this was going to be, a particularly monumental change. Just for the reason that I think AF tells me already that often your identity is somewhat known even to your close family, so it's likely that, some people already know this, that's awareness of queer individuals. But additionally, I think Neg and AF both suggest at times that there are obviously other reasons why people have homophobic beliefs or why they are against people. It's not always just a lack of exposure. And so again, while I think exposure means maybe people get a bit more accepting, it's unclear to me that this is going to get rid of really oppressive, policies and stuff like that. So I'm somewhat unwilling to trade this kind of more uncertain benefit off of against, the some people will be at jeopardy of their lives because they are forced to admit an identity before they are ready to. So I think, while yes, maybe long-term things get a bit better, I'm not really willing to trade off the immediate sacrifice of individuals. The second reason that affirmative gives as to why, things are better under their side is they say you're able to kind of rebut these arguments by proving they are untrue because they have no substance. Like you kind of, find out the reason someone believes that women belong in the kitchen is, unsubstantiated, right? Like you can ask them the tricky questions and you realize it's kind of silly or based in a book. I think, again, this has two issues. The first is that, again, I think it's somewhat unclear to me that this is sufficient to necessarily overturn people's beliefs. Like I understand to us, maybe it sounds silly that because it's in a book or the Bible, maybe it's not the most convincing thing. But I think because this is someone's truth, they're able to say it's because God sent someone to hell and they truly believe that. And that is going to be compelling to some level of people. Again, it's kind of unclear to me why it looks so silly when a lot of these people, I think, do hold beliefs because of, quite fundamental reasons, because they generally do really think that this is a moral plague upon society. So again, I think maybe you expose that and people who are not religious or are not predisposed to those things or still disagree and maybe disagree more. But it's unclear why people who would buy in otherwise, who are convinced by ideas that, they see around them, aren't convinced when, the people propagating those ideas are kind of honest about it with the reasons they're probably already being honest about it because they truly do believe them. And it's unclear to me that, that people don't truly believe those things sufficiently that, that you would kind of expose that they're doing it for money or whatever else. I think that would have needed a bit more explanation to kind of get me that far. All of us just kind of to say, in the way up, I think it is possible that maybe long term you get some societal improvement there, but I do think it comes at a pretty massive cost to quite a vulnerable group of people who are just exposed to reveal their identity. And I think that is a win that lands in the, I want to say affirmative, but no, it is the negative side of the camp. Secondly, on interpersonal relationships, this is the second point that I think kind of Neg takes. Affirmative brings a few points here. So firstly, they talk about abusers, and they say kind of it's good that you know you're being abused, that someone is kind of honest and upfront with you about that, that you can kind of ask them the question and get to the bottom of it. I think this is responded by Neg, who says, often you know this already, it's about power dynamics that mean you can't leave, and that is unchanged. So I don't think Affirmative is able to claim a win there. Affirmative also here suggests that you don't sink time into friendships that aren't going to work out, because you know from the get-go that they're like, not going to be good friends and you're not going to get along. And I think, yeah, maybe this is true, but again, it doesn't seem too substantial. Like, I don't know, it's maybe a bit under-impacted. Some time doesn't seem like the worst thing in this debate. And I think that's in comparison to Negative's point here, which I think is quite well impacted and well explained about how hard truths are hard truths. Affirmative says norms change, you're less likely to react as badly because we're used to being told the truth. But I still think it's a little unclear to me why it still doesn't sting to be told you're ugly, or to be told, I don't know, you're dumb or whatever, when there are other societal norms not related to truth saying that that's still a valuation of you and that you still probably take it to core. So maybe it is a bit duller and a little bit more blunt, but I still think people internalize it, and it's probably pretty awful for their, friendships and relationships and that sort of thing, and for their self-esteem. The second response I think we hear from Affirmative is that actually you think positively of your friends because they're your friends, and I agree that maybe in an overall broad picture you think positively of them, like you think the positives outweigh the negatives, but that you probably still perceive that they have negatives, like maybe you do love someone who's just an awful singer. So I think it's still quite likely that those negatives come to surface, and that it's possible that people focus on those and it seeds doubt into their relationships, and that really affects them overall. So I think this affects most people. Their relationships get worse, they're told more often that about their deficiencies, even if they're also told more often about their truths. I think being aware of those deficiencies cuts pretty deep and is pretty bad for people. That's on individuals, so I think that's where Negative claims they win. On social institutions, overall, I think AF was a bit ahead on a lot of these points. On companies, they said you can't greenwash or hide, the truth. Negative tells me that the truth is not the issue. We already know about a lot of this, and I think this really effectively mitigates the point pretty substantially. As in, I think it is true that a lot of people do know this. I think we hear kind of a rebuild of this later on from Affirmative when they say, but this takes away plausible deniability. Like, you have to be honest that you knew that they were, a bad environmental company. And I think this is a good response. But again, I think the number of people who were lying about being plausibly about being, you know what I mean? Like, it's quite a small group of people that kind of impacts, and who now have to be open that they're kind of shit people, and maybe it changes their actions. And again, it's somewhat unclear to me that then the impacts of that are particularly large, because I'm not sure that's enough of a consumer base to force companies to do kind of big things. Negative also suggests you can hide the information and kind of make it harder to get. I'm a little unclear what this looks like. I'm pretty sure this can kind of happen under both sides. To the extent it exists, it's mitigation to the point. But I still think Affirmative is right that we're more honest about what companies are doing. I just, as we'll get into when I talk a bit about weighing, I'm unconvinced that this is a massive change. It probably needed more impacting and explanation of the awful things companies are doing and how we can force them to change and hold them accountable with the truth. The second thing that Affirmative talks about here is governments. Affirmative tells me that you know more what your governments are doing when they're doing bad things, so you can better boycott, do your vote, that sort of thing, hold them more accountable. And I think it is true that there is less secrecy. Next attempt to flip this is to suggest actually this is a bad thing. Governments need secrecy in times of crisis to kind of, not have the public panic when they know the alien invasion is a couple days away, or I don't know, whatever the crisis is, they've got to keep it to themselves. I think both of these are true and both apply in different circumstances. Like, it is true that at times our governments should be more truthful to us. It is also true that at times, it's probably not good that we hear all of the inner workings or the incompetencies of the governments. And I think weighing that is a little bit hard. Again, I probably lean slightly towards Affirmative just because I think Negative sets it really in times of crisis, and I'm unsure how common those are compared to Affirmatives. We overall have more transparency and truth all the time. So I think, again, maybe more transparency and truth leans towards Affirmative, but I don't think it's a slam dunk win. And I also, again, think it kind of runs into some under-impacting issues, a bit of lack of clarity surrounding how massively this, leads to policy changes, and a really clear stepping through of what this kind of does to government systems as well. It just is a bit less direct. The final thing Neg says here is that, they point out politicians will be more evil because you need to have less empathy to be okay saying the evil truths all the time. I think that this just, again, probably needed to be stepped through a little bit more, why this isn't true in the status quo when it is also probably demoralizing to be a politician and to, be keeping secrets and working in a system that both teams often agree is pretty corrupt. So I don't know, politicians are probably evil under either one. The final thing is on the judicial system. Here, Affirmative says evidence that you can get better evidence, basically, right? you get people to admit to being guilty and it's like you're 100% sure. Negative's first response is that this is actually bad because it means that you get rid of the principle of being innocent before proven guilty. I honestly don't think that this made too much sense to me for the reason that it was somewhat unclear that you were finding people guilty. Like, I just think that it needed to be better impacted by negative. Why? Firstly, people were being detained before they got to court cases. Like, normally you'd just, I guess, call them into court for that day. Like, it wasn't clear to me that a massive amount of rights were being taken away. But additionally, if you went into court then and said, no, I'm not guilty because you weren't guilty, you'd then be released free. So maybe there was some, infringement on rights. Some people were forced to testify who otherwise wouldn't, or occasionally someone who the government thought was a murderer was incarcerated for a couple of days. But again, I think that was relatively uncommon and probably traded off against more murderers being in prison to some degree. But I think negative stuff about your truth and the fact that witnesses and victims and, people are going to be saying what is true to them, and that we are now less able to kind of, I guess, consider that because we believe it to be true at face value and we're not as kind of critically thinking about what they're saying because we don't perceive that they can be lying. It means that there are some instances where you would potentially wrongfully incarcerate someone because someone deeply believes that something happened to them that didn't actually, and that we don't really have mechanisms to kind of account for that and rebound on that. Again, overall, I think probably having this evidence means that, more people who deserve to go to prison go to prison. Maybe you get some more innocent people in the mix there as well. Again, I probably lean slightly towards affirmative on this one, but I don't think it's a slam dunk. At the end of that, basically, I think we have negative winning on individuals, and I think relatively, certainly on that one. And I think we have affirmative winning on all of these kind of societal institutions, but I think it's a bit more kind of long term. And so then weighing those, I think there's a few ways that I kind of, break that deadlock, if you will. The first is that I do think that negative just does do better impacting throughout the debate of explaining to me why these things are important. Things like why the criminal justice system being quicker or more efficient and not going through trial processes is never really explained by side affirmative, and probably that impacting would have really helped in convincing me that this was really critically important, whereas I think we did hear about people, being killed because of their queer identity or being massively uncomfortable. And again, I just think that was far more certain. The second is just about that concreteness of the points. One was direct and on individuals overall. One was it relying on government institutions and on court systems and various other factors overall, where I think there were more possibilities of things going wrong in the mix there in some degree, relying on voters then voting for the right policies in the first place, changing their votes, that sort of thing, versus, direct discrimination. So I think, again, that weighs in the favor of side negative. But the final thing is just on scale. Again, I think a lot of these points about, justice and on governance and on, climate, on all of those probably are really important. But again, I don't think it's ever explained how impactful this is on all of society or how many people these are likely to impact. Whereas I think most people probably do run into these interpersonal conflicts at some point in their life, whereas less people are probably, murdered and then rightfully avenged because the criminal justice system is a bit better. That being said, I do think it was really close, and by that, obviously, I think you both made really good arguments in either direction. I hope that was clear. Feel free to come ask questions and come get feedback. Honestly, I have no idea what's happening after this debate, but I assume we're just heading back to the next room for some afternoon tea. So yeah, good job, everyone.